20 years ago, the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody delivered its final report. 2 decades on, Indigenous incarceration rates remain high and Indigenous deaths in custody are still happening. I spoke with one of the commissioners, the Honorable Hal Wooten, and asked him what he believes the legacy of that inquiry has been.
They set up a Royal Commission to investigate all Aboriginal deaths in custody since the 1st of January 1980. There turned out to be about 100 of them when the count was made, and that was the main job of the Commission, to investigate how those people came to die in custody and how the subsequent police investigations and coronial inquiries were carried out. I think in those areas particularly, there's been very clear benefit, very much better care taken of prisoners, very much more transparent and satisfying investigations. People often forget that today, that was the primary purpose of the Commission. When we started our work, it became apparent that the real problem wasn't, as many Aboriginals suspected, that police and prison officers were killing Aboriginals. The real problem was that there were so many Aboriginals in jail.
Indigenous, as you say, Indigenous incarceration rates remain high. Does that indicate to you that the Commission really failed in their task?
Well, no, I think Commissioner Johnson, who wrote the national report, recommended that imprisonment should be a punishment of last resort. Instead of that, we've seen all over Australia a very harsh, punitive approach to punishment. Commissioner Johnson's recommendations were directed very much to tackling the things that made these communities such breeding grounds of people who would get locked up. But the fact is that the governments haven't succeeded in improving those communities, except in a very few respects. In many respects, the condition of the communities has gone backwards.
On the issue of alcohol, the Commission was criticised for offering decriminalisation and diversion as the solutions to alcohol abuse. Is it a fair criticism to say that the Commission went soft on the issue of alcohol?
The suggestion that the Commission ignored it or treated it lightly is quite wrong. The primary recommendations of the Commission about alcohol was that the most important way of tackling it was by trying to diminish the supply, and his primary recommendations in relation to alcohol were to empower Aboriginal communities to control alcohol in their communities and to give them the backing of the law to stop people sly grogging and breaking the controls that were set up.
You talked about that perhaps the Australian community wasn't ready to have this debate 20 years ago, or there was a suggestion that the issue of alcohol and cutting supply of alcohol in certain areas, that debate wasn't really ready to be had 20 years ago. Would that be, is that sort of what you were suggesting?
I think there has been some criticism of the Commission by people who thought that instead of emphasising the way these communities had been destroyed and disempowered by their treatment over 200 years, it should have just said alcohol's the problem and concentrated on alcohol. Now, I think if that had been done at the time, it would have had a very destructive effect on the willingness of the general community to help and on their willingness to help in useful ways. I think it was very important that the Commission should have explained to the general community that we had on our hands a problem that had been created by white settlement here, and it was no use just blaming the victims. So the important thing was to try and find solutions.
20 years on, is there anything that you heard during the Royal Commission that's really stuck with you throughout that time?
One of the most important things that we heard over and over again was this feeling of not being recognised, not being taken seriously, not being listened to. And Commissioner Johnson's national report throughout goes to great pains to build into all the recommendations and discussions the need to really listen to Aboriginal people, to really take them seriously, and to give them more control of their own lives.
And you say the national report was just a moment in history, and it's up to us, the Australian public, to take the next step. What would you like to see as that next step?
The problems are going to be with us for a long time. I think, as Commissioner Johnson said, in the end, only the Aboriginal people themselves can solve them, unless they are prepared to really take responsibility for their lives. We're not going to solve the problem, and I think something we have to realise is that this is not something easy.
Hal Wooten, thank you so much for talking with us.
Right, thank you, Louisa.
And an extended version of that interview will be online at our website.